The letter said, "Arrive September 15th. I'll be the man in the black hat." But the man in the black hat was dead. Garrett Stone stood on the platform of the Redemption Falls train station, watching steam billow from the locomotive as it screeched to a
Easy
halt.
now, girl. Let's
The
get
late
you ready.
afternoon sun hung low over the Montana
Long
territory,
day. Want to share?
casting long
Sure.
shadows
Here.
across the
Thanks.
dusty
Appreciate it.
boards beneath his
Of
boots.
course.
Looks like
At
rain.
42 years old, he cut an imposing figure. 6'4", broad-shouldered from years of breaking horses and driving cattle, weathered hands that told stories of countless hard winters. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his green eyes held a sadness that never quite faded even when he attempted to smile. He held the crumpled letter in his calloused hand, reading it for perhaps the 100th time since William Blackwood had shown it to him 3 weeks ago. The old man had been giddy as a schoolboy pacing the ranch office with uncharacteristic energy. A mail-order bride, he'd said, coming all the way from Missouri, a widow herself, practical, seeking companionship, not romance. "It'll be good to have a woman's touch around the place again," William had insisted, his weathered face bright with hope. Garrett had thought it foolish. A 68-year-old man marrying a stranger sight unseen. But William Blackwood had been more than his employer for the past 10 years. He'd been mentor friend, the closest thing to family Garrett had allowed himself since Catherine died. So Garrett had nodded, kept his doubts to himself, and promised to meet the woman at the station when she arrived. Only William would never meet her now. 3 days ago, Garrett had found him collapsed in the barn, clutching his chest, eyes already glazing over. The doctor said it was his heart, quick and merciful. They'd buried him yesterday in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Red Mesa Ranch, the land William had built from nothing over 40 years. The land he'd never legally willed to anyone, having no wife, no children, no close kin to speak of. Garrett should have sent a telegram, should have warned the woman not to come, that her intended husband was dead before she'd even left Missouri. But the telegraph office had been closed for repairs, and the train was already en route. There hadn't been time. So now he stood here, hat in hand, preparing to deliver news that would shatter whatever hopes this stranger had carried across 1,000 miles. The train doors opened. Passengers began to disembark. Cowboys heading to the ranches north of town. A merchant with crates of goods. An elderly couple probably visiting family. And then he saw her. She stepped down from the car with careful precision, her black dress stark against the golden afternoon light. Widow's weeds, Garrett realized. She was already mourning someone. The dress was simple but well-made, though worn at the cuffs. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, a few wisps escaping to frame a face that was younger than he'd expected. Much younger. She couldn't be more than 19 or 20, with hazel eyes that scanned the platform with the wariness of a doe entering a clearing. She was thin, not fashionably slender, but genuinely undernourished, her cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. Yet she held herself with dignity, chin lifted, shoulders squared, despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. Behind her came the children. Garrett's stomach dropped. First a boy of about 15, red-haired and gangly, carrying 2 battered carpet bags and watching every stranger on the platform with hostile suspicion. Then a girl of perhaps 13, dark braids and a cotton dress too small for her growing frame. She held a baby on her hip, maybe 18 months old, who was crying with the particular intensity of a child who'd been traveling too long. Another girl, younger, maybe 10, clung to the older one's skirts, her eyes wide and frightened. 5 people. William's letter had mentioned a mail-order bride seeking a new start. It had said nothing about 4 children. The woman's eyes swept the platform, clearly looking for the man in the black hat. Her gaze passed over Garrett once, then returned. Something in her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just desperate hope. She walked toward him, the children trailing behind, like ducklings following their mother. Up close, Garrett could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a small reticule. The baby was fussing, and the older girl was trying unsuccessfully to soothe it. "Mr. Blackwood," the woman asked, her voice steady despite the fear Garrett could see swimming in her eyes. He removed his hat, suddenly aware of how this would sound, how it would destroy her. "No, ma'am. My name is Garrett Stone. I'm the foreman at Red Mesa Ranch. Mr. Blackwood sent me to meet you." Relief flooded her face, quickly followed by confusion. "He's not here." "Ma'am, there's something you need to know." Garrett's throat felt tight. "Mr. Blackwood passed away 3 days ago. Heart attack. It was quick. He didn't suffer." The words hung in the air between them. Around them, the platform continued its bustle. People greeting loved ones, porters hauling trunks, the hiss of the steam engine preparing for its return journey. But in the small circle where they stood, everything had gone still. The woman didn't cry, didn't gasp or swoon, or make any of the dramatic gestures Garrett might have expected. Instead, she simply closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, they held a resignation so profound it made something in his chest ache. "I see," she said quietly. "When is the next eastbound train?" The boy stepped forward, protective instinct overriding his youth. "Charlie, what does this mean?" "Charlie?" So that was her name. Charlotte probably, but she went by Charlie. "It means we're going back, Ben." Her voice was calm, controlled. "We'll figure something out." "The last eastbound left an hour ago," Garrett said. "Next one's in 4 days." He watched her do the calculation, saw it in the way her jaw tightened, the slight tightening of her fingers on her reticule. 4 days meant lodging, food expenses she clearly couldn't afford. The worn condition of her clothes, the children's two small garments, the single small bag they carried between them, all spoke of poverty barely held at bay. "I see," she said again. "Is there a hotel in town?" "The Silver Spoon. It's the only one. Has rooms and a restaurant." She nodded, still composed, still fighting to maintain dignity in the face of catastrophe. "Thank you for meeting us, Mr. Stone. I'm sorry for your loss. Mr. Blackwood spoke highly of you in his letters." She turned to leave, gathering the children with small gestures. The baby was crying harder now, and the youngest girl had started to whimper. But Charlotte Charlie, whoever she was, kept her head high as she walked toward the station steps. Garrett stood there watching them go, Catherine's voice clear as a bell in his memory. What kind of man leaves a woman with children to starve, Garrett? What kind of man looks away from suffering? He has the power to ease. He had loved Catherine with everything he had. 22 years old when they married, she'd been fire and conviction and unwavering moral clarity. She'd made him want to be better than he was. And then she died, and their 3-month-old daughter, Grace, had followed her 2 days later, and Garrett had spent 7 years trying to remember how to feel anything at all. Looking at these 5 desperate strangers, he felt something stir in his chest. A door he'd thought welded shut was creaking on rusted hinges, letting in light he wasn't sure he wanted. "Wait," he called out. Charlotte stopped, turned back. The evening sun caught her face, and for just a moment Garrett saw past the exhaustion and fear to the stubborn strength underneath. This woman had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, had brought 4 children with her into an uncertain future, had just learned her last hope was dead, and was preparing to turn around and somehow survive the journey back with no resources and no prospects. She wasn't giving up. She was regrouping. And that more than anything made Garrett's decision for him. "Let me help you get settled for the night," he said. "It's the least I can do given the circumstances." "Mr. Stone, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity, ma'am. It's common decency. You've traveled a long way. The children look exhausted. Let me get you to the hotel, buy you a meal, and we can figure out the rest tomorrow." She studied him for a long moment, those hazel eyes searching his face for ulterior motives, for the catch that surely had to be hiding in such generosity. Garrett kept his expression open, patient. He was good at waiting. Horses had taught him that. You didn't rush a spooked animal. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but only for tonight. I'll repay you when I can." "Didn't ask you to, ma'am." He loaded their meager bags into the ranch wagon, noting how the boy Ben watched his every move with barely concealed hostility, protecting his family. Garrett respected that. The older girl, the one with the baby, was quieter, more watchful. She studied Garrett with dark, intelligent eyes, already trying to figure out if he was friend or foe. The wagon ride into town was silent, except for the baby's intermittent crying and the younger girl's questions about where they were going, what Montana was like, whether there would be food soon. Charlotte answered each question with patient kindness, her voice never betraying the desperation Garrett knew she must be feeling. Redemption Falls came into view as the sun touched the horizon, painting the wood-frame buildings in shades of gold and amber. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 200 permanent residents, with another 100 scattered across the surrounding ranches. One main street, a handful of businesses, a church at the north end, and the cemetery on the hill beyond. The Silver Spoon stood at the corner of Main and Cattleman's Row, a 2-story building that served as the town's only hotel and its fanciest restaurant. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop out front, set the brake, and helped Charlotte down. Her hand was ice cold despite the warmth of the evening. Inside the restaurant was moderately busy with the dinner crowd. Ranchers and businessmen, a few families, the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread making Garrett's stomach growl. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, too consumed with the business of settling William's affairs to think about food. The hotel owner, Henderson, was behind the front desk, his portly frame wrapped in a vest that strained at the buttons. He looked up as they entered, his eyes immediately narrowing as he took in Charlotte's widow's blacks, the ragged children, the desperate edge that clung to them like smoke. "Mr. Stone," Henderson said, his tone carefully neutral. "What can I do for you? Need a room for Mrs.?" Garrett realized he didn't know her last name. "Hayes," Charlotte supplied quietly. "Charlotte Hayes. Mrs. Hayes and her family, your best room." Henderson's face went red, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Now, Mr. Stone, I run a respectable establishment. I can't just rent rooms to that sort." The words hit like a physical blow. Garrett saw Charlotte's face flush, saw the shame and anger warring in her expression. The boy, Ben, took a step forward, fist clenching, but Charlotte put a hand on his arm, holding him back. "That sort," Garrett's voice was quiet, dangerous. "What sort would that be, Henderson?" "Well, I mean a woman alone with children, no husband showing up in widow's clothes looking for God knows what." Henderson's face was getting redder, but he pressed on. "Everyone knows about William Blackwood and his mail-order bride scheme. Now the old fool's dead, and here she is probably thinking she can claim his property. I won't be party to that kind of deception." The restaurant had gone silent. Every eye in the room was on them now. Garrett was aware of the townspeople watching, judging, seeing exactly what Henderson saw. A desperate woman with too many mouths to feed a dead benefactor, an opportunity written all over her face. Charlotte's hand tightened on Ben's arm, her knuckles white, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "I understand your concerns, sir. We'll find somewhere else." "There is nowhere else," Henderson said smugly. "But in this town." Garrett felt something white-hot and furious kindle in his chest. He'd been numb for 7 years, going through the motions of living without really feeling much of anything. But this casual cruelty toward people who had done nothing wrong except be poor and desperate, this he felt. "Give me the key," Garrett said softly. "Mr. Stone, I really can't. Give me the key, or I'll tell every rancher in this territory that you refused hospitality to a widow and orphans. See how much business you do then." Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Finally, with shaking hands, he produced a key. "Room 4, upstairs." Charlotte was staring at Garrett with an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly. Gratitude, maybe. But also wariness, that same watchful caution he'd seen when she first stepped off the train. "Mr. Stone, you don't have to." "Please sit down, Mrs. Hayes." Garrett gestured to the table by the window, the best spot in the restaurant with a view of the main street and the mountains beyond. "You and your family look like you could use a meal." For a moment he thought she might refuse. Her pride was a palpable thing armor against a world that had clearly given her plenty of reasons to protect herself. But then the baby let out a particularly pitiful wail, and the youngest girl whispered something about being hungry, and Charlotte's shoulders sagged just slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is very kind." They sat. The children's eyes went wide at the table settings, the clean white tablecloth, the gleaming silverware. Garrett realized with a jolt that this might be the first time they'd eaten in a proper restaurant. The older girl, the one holding the baby, was trying to soothe the crying child while simultaneously staring at the menu board on the wall as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "What are your names?" Garrett asked, trying to make his voice gentle. Children, especially frightened ones, responded better to softness than authority. The older girl glanced at Charlotte, who nodded permission. "I'm Lily," she said quietly. "This is Rose." She jiggled the baby, who was red-faced and howling. "She's hungry. We haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Yesterday morning. They'd been on that train for more than 24 hours without food. "And I'm Grace," the youngest volunteered, her voice small but brave. "I'm 10. I'll be 11 in March." "Ben," the red-haired boy said shortly, still watching Garrett with suspicion. "I'm 15. And if you're thinking, Ben," Charlotte's voice was soft but carried an edge of warning. "Mr. Stone has been nothing but kind. We'll remember our manners." The food came quickly, Henderson clearly wanting this uncomfortable situation resolved as fast as possible. Platters of steak, bowls of mashed potatoes swimming in butter green beans, fresh baked rolls, and a pitcher of cold milk. The children stared at it like they'd never seen so much food in one place. Go ahead, Garrett said. Eat. They fell on the food with the desperate hunger of people who'd been doing without for far too long. Even Charlotte, who tried to maintain some semblance of propriety, ate with a speed that spoke of genuine starvation. Only after she'd taken several bites did she start cutting small pieces of steak for the baby who gummed them happily, her crying finally subsiding. Garrett ate his own meal, slowly watching them, watching the way Charlotte made sure each child got enough before taking more for herself. The way Lily helped Grace cut her meat. The way Ben, despite his hostility, saved the choicest bits for his sisters. They were a family bound by love and survival in equal measure. And they had nothing. No money, no prospects, no way to get back to Missouri, even if there was anything waiting for them there. Which Garrett suspected from the complete absence of any mention of other family there wasn't. Catherine's voice again clear as if she were sitting beside him. You can't save everyone, Garrett, but you can save someone. He'd failed to save her, failed to save baby Grace. Had spent 7 years locked in a cabin on a ranch working himself to exhaustion to avoid thinking about how he'd failed the two people who'd mattered most. But maybe, just maybe, he could do something right this time. The meal finished, Garrett paid the bill, ignoring Henderson's sour expression. He walked the family up to their room, a simple space with 2 beds and a wash basin, but clean and warm. The children were already drooping with exhaustion, Grace's head nodding as she tried to stay awake. Get some rest, Garrett said from the doorway. We'll talk in the morning. Mr. Stone? Charlotte's voice stopped him. She'd been getting Rose settled, but now she turned to face him fully. In the lamplight, her face looked younger, more vulnerable. Why are you helping us? It was a fair question. Garrett considered his answer carefully. Because you asked for help instead of stealing. Because you're trying to keep your family together. Because, he paused, searching for words. Because nobody should have to beg for leftovers. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I'll repay you. I don't know how or when, but I will. Didn't ask you to, ma'am. He tipped his hat. Sleep well. Garrett left them there and made his way back downstairs, intending to get his wagon and head back to the ranch. But as he passed through the restaurant, now mostly empty, he heard voices from a corner booth. 2 women townspeople talking in the loud whispers of people who want to be overheard. Shameful, that's what it is. A man his age living alone, taking in a young woman like that. Mail order bride, they say, coming here to trap poor William Blackwood. Now he's dead, and here she is with all those children. Convenient, don't you think? Someone should tell the sheriff. There's something wrong about all this. That Stone fellow, too. Too eager to help. Mark my words, she's already got her hooks in him. Probably planning to claim William's ranch through some scheme or other. Garrett's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to turn around to confront these gossiping harpies to defend Charlotte Hayes's honor. But what could he say? He barely knew the woman. Had no idea what her intentions had been, whether she'd truly come in good faith or if there was some element of calculation in answering William's advertisement. Not that it mattered. Whatever her original motivation, she was here now, stranded and desperate, and that was enough. He walked out into the night, climbed into his wagon, and started the long ride back to Red Mesa Ranch. The moon was rising, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Garrett had made this trip thousands of times over the past decade, knew every rut in the road, every turn, every landmark. But tonight it felt different somehow. For the first time in 7 years, he'd felt something other than the crushing numbness that had been his constant companion. Anger, yes, at Henderson's cruelty and the townswomen's gossip, but also something else. A flicker of purpose, of meaning, of the possibility that his life might be more than just an endless succession of empty days. The ranch came into view dark against the darker sky. The main house where William had lived alone for 40 years stood silent and shuttered. The bunkhouse beyond it showed lights in the windows, the ranch hands still awake, probably playing cards and drinking whiskey. And off to the side, the foreman's cabin where Garrett lived, small and solitary. He took care of the horse, checked on the cattle, did his evening rounds by habit and routine. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over the problem of Charlotte Hayes and her 4 siblings, like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. In the morning, she'd board that eastbound train with what little money she had left. She'd take those children back to Missouri to whatever uncertain fate awaited them there. Orphanages, probably. Indenture, possibly. Poverty and separation and slow grinding despair. Unless. The idea came to him fully formed, so audacious and probably foolish that he almost laughed. But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Or at least the more sense it made if he was willing to do something utterly insane. Garrett sat on his cabin's porch looking up at the stars, Catherine's face clear in his memory. She'd been a practical woman, his wife. Romantic, yes, but also pragmatic. She'd married him knowing he had nothing but a strong back and a willingness to work. They'd built a life together through partnership and mutual respect, and the love had come after. What he was considering wasn't so different, really. Just a different kind of partnership, a different kind of mutual benefit. And if there was no love in it, well, he'd had love once. That was more than most people got. By the time the sun rose, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold, Garrett had made his decision. It was probably crazy, definitely impulsive, but it was also the first thing that had felt right in 7 long years. He rode back to town, arriving at the Silver Spoon just as the restaurant was opening for breakfast. Henderson scowled when he saw Garrett but didn't refuse him entry. Garrett took a table, ordered coffee he didn't want, and waited. Charlotte came down 20 minutes later, the children trailing behind her. She'd done her best to freshen up, but the exhaustion was still evident in her face. She saw Garrett and stopped, surprise flickering across her features. "Mr. Stone, I didn't expect to see you again." "Need to talk to you," Garrett said. "Privately, if possible." She hesitated, then nodded to Lily. "Take the others and order breakfast, whatever you'd like." She pulled a few coins from her reticule, probably the last money she had. "I'll join you in a moment." Lily nodded, gathering the younger children and steering them toward an empty table. Ben followed, but not before shooting Garrett a look that promised violence if anything untoward happened to his sister. Charlotte sat across from Garrett, her hands folded on the table, her expression guarded. "What did you need to discuss?" Now that the moment was here, Garrett found the words harder than he'd expected. He took a breath, met her eyes, and decided on directness. "I have a proposition for you. It's unconventional, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy, but hear me out." She waited, those hazel eyes watchful. "Red Mesa Ranch needs a cook," Garrett began. "The previous one, Maria, left last month to care for her sick mother. We've been making do, but 15 ranch hands need feeding, and I'm not much for kitchen work." "I see." Charlotte's voice was carefully neutral. "And you're offering me the position in a manner of speaking." Garrett leaned forward. "But it's more complicated than that. William died without a will. No wife, no children, no close family to speak of. Under territorial law, the ranch would normally go to his nearest living relative if one could be found. Ben could learn the cattle business, the girls could help with house duties. It would be a fair trade, room board wages, and legal protection." Charlotte stared at him for a long moment. "Why would you do this?" "I told you the ranch needs—" "No." She cut him off, her voice sharp. "The real reason. Nobody does something for nothing, Mr. Stone. Especially not something this significant. What do you really want?" Garrett met her gaze, and for a moment he considered lying. Considered giving her some simple, believable explanation that would make this seem like a purely business transaction. But something in her eyes demanded honesty. "7 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter to fever," he said quietly. "Since then, I've been going through the motions. Working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. This ranch is too big for one person, too quiet. And when I saw you yesterday with your family, trying so hard to survive with dignity, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that life is for the living, that maybe I've been dead long enough." The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way Garrett hadn't been with anyone in years. Charlotte's expression softened slightly, some of the wariness easing. "It wouldn't be a real marriage," she said slowly, testing the words. "Just legal protection." "Just legal protection," Garrett confirmed. "You'd be free to leave whenever you wanted once things are settled. Or stay on as cook if you preferred. Your choice always. And you'd expect nothing from me. Nothing beyond the work. Nothing beyond honest work for honest wages." Charlotte looked over at the table where her siblings sat. Ben was watching them intently, clearly trying to read the situation. Lily was helping Rose eat while Grace studied the menu with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. I need to think about this, Charlotte said finally. Of course, take your time. How much time do I have? The eastbound train leaves in 3 days. If you're going to take it, I'll buy you tickets. If you decide to stay, we'll need to visit the town clerk tomorrow to make the arrangement legal. Charlotte nodded slowly. All right, I'll give you an answer by tonight. They sat there for a moment longer, two strangers contemplating a bargain that would change both their lives. Then Charlotte Rose smoothed her black skirts and walked back to her family. Garrett watched her go, aware that he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life, or possibly the best decision since marrying Catherine 20 years ago. Time would tell. He finished his coffee, paid the bill, and left. He had ranch work to attend to cattle, to check hands, to supervise. Life on Red Mesa went on regardless of personal upheaval. But as he rode back through the morning light, Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. For 7 years, he'd been frozen, locked in the moment of Catherine's death, unable to move forward or back. And now, suddenly, the ice was cracking. Whether that would lead to drowning or freedom, he honestly didn't know. The day passed in its usual rhythm. Garrett checked fence lines, supervised the branding of new calves, discussed water rights with a neighboring rancher. The work was familiar, comforting in its predictability. But his mind kept returning to Charlotte Hayes and her impossible situation, her impossible choice. Evening came. Garrett cleaned up, changed into a fresh shirt, and rode back to town, his heart beating harder than it had any right to. He found Charlotte sitting on the hotel's front porch alone, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. She looked up as he approached, and something in her expression told him she'd made her decision. I talked to Ben, she said without preamble. Told him everything. He's suspicious, thinks you might be trying to take advantage, but he also knows we're out of options. And what do you think? Garrett asked. Charlotte stood facing him fully. In the fading light, she looked impossibly young and infinitely old, at the same time worn down by hardship but unbroken. I think you're offering me a lifeline when I'm drowning, she said quietly. I think it's probably foolish to accept help from a stranger. I think there are 1,000 ways this could go wrong. She paused. But I also think my siblings deserve better than whatever we'd find back in Missouri. They deserve safety, food, a place to grow up without fear. And if marrying you in name only can give them that, then I'll do it. Relief flooded through Garrett, followed immediately by a flutter of something that might have been nervousness. You're sure? No, Charlotte said honestly. But I'm deciding anyway, with one condition. Name it. If either of us wants to end this arrangement, we can. No recriminations, no blame. We dissolve the marriage and part ways as friends. Agreed. Garrett held out his hand. Partners then. Charlotte looked at his hand for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was firm despite the trembling he could feel in her fingers. Partners. They stood there on the porch as the sun set, two desperate people making a desperate bargain, and Garrett wondered if this was how all great changes began. Not with fanfare or certainty, but with a handshake in the twilight and a hope that tomorrow might be better than today. We should tell the children, Charlotte said, together. All right, what do we tell them? The truth, that it's a legal arrangement to give us all a home and a future, that you're helping us and we'll help you. They're smart, they'll understand. They found the children in the hotel room. Ben was sitting on the bed, arms crossed, clearly having assigned himself the role of protector and skeptic. Lily held Rose, who was finally sleeping peacefully. Grace was looking out the window at the darkening street below. Mr. Stone and I have made a decision, Charlotte began, her voice steady. Tomorrow we're going to be married. It's a legal arrangement that will allow us to stay at Red Mesa Ranch to work and earn our keep. Mr. Stone will provide us with a home and we'll help him run the ranch. Ben's eyes narrowed. What kind of arrangement? The kind that benefits everyone, Garrett said, meeting the boy's hostile gaze. Your sister will be the ranch cook. You'll work with the cattle if you're willing to learn. Lily and Grace can help with house duties and tend the chickens. Everyone works, everyone eats. Fair wages for fair work. And what do you get out of it? Ben challenged. Help running a ranch that's too big for one person, and the satisfaction of doing right by your family. Men don't do things out of the goodness of their hearts. Ben, Charlotte's voice held warning, but Garrett held up a hand. No, he's right to ask. You want to know what I really get? I get to not be alone anymore. I get to feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. And I get the chance to honor a promise I made to William Blackwood that if anything happened to him, I'd take care of the woman he'd sent for. Something in Ben's expression softened just slightly. If you hurt her, I'll kill you. I don't care how big you are. Ben, Charlotte looked horrified, but Garrett respected the threat. Fair enough. I'd expect nothing less. They made their plans then. The ceremony would be tomorrow at the town clerk's office. Simple legal binding. No fuss, no celebration. Just paperwork and promises made in the eyes of the law. That night, Garrett rode back to the ranch one last time as a single man. Tomorrow he'd have a wife. A paper wife, a legal arrangement, nothing more. But still the word carried weight, carried memory, carried the ghost of Catherine's smile and the echo of vows made 20 years ago before God and congregation. He wondered what Catherine would think of this. Would she approve? Would she understand? Or would she be hurt that he was taking another woman's name, even in this hollow, businesslike way? But Catherine was gone, had been gone for 7 years. And the living had to keep living, had to make choices and take chances and hope that somehow it would all work out in the end. The next morning dawned clear and cold autumn, asserting itself in the Montana air. Garrett dressed in his best shirt, the one he usually saved for church, and rode to town with his heart beating an unsteady rhythm against his ribs. He found Charlotte and the children waiting outside the clerk's office. She wore the same black dress, but she'd done something different with her hair, pulling it back in a way that made her look older, more mature. Ben stood beside her, playing the role of protective brother and father figure both. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. Mrs. Patterson, the town clerk, was a kind-faced woman in her 60s who'd known William Blackwood for years. She looked at Charlotte with sympathy and at Garrett with approval. "It's good you're doing this," she said quietly as she prepared the marriage license. William would have wanted someone to look after her. The vows were simple, perfunctory, legal rather than romantic. "Do you, Garrett Stone, take this woman? Do you, Charlotte Hayes, take this man?" I do. Sign here and here. Witnessed by Ben and Mrs. Patterson." "You may kiss your bride," Mrs. Patterson said with a small smile. The moment stretched awkwardly. Garrett and Charlotte looked at each other, both clearly unprepared for this particular tradition. It was supposed to be just a legal arrangement, just paperwork. But people were watching, and to not seal it with a kiss would invite question, speculation. Garrett leaned in, aiming for Charlotte's cheek, something brief and chaste. But she turned her head at the wrong moment, and his lips brushed the corner of her mouth, instead a whisper of contact that sent an unexpected jolt through him. Charlotte's eyes widened, her cheeks flushing pink. They pulled apart quickly, both looking anywhere but at each other. "Congratulations," Mrs. Patterson said, oblivious to the tension. "May you have many happy years together." Happy years. Garrett nearly laughed at the absurdity. This wasn't about happiness. This was about survival, about legal protection, about doing what needed to be done. The Montana landscape unfolded before them in rolling hills of golden grass, dotted with clusters of cattle that looked like dark stones scattered across a vast canvas. In the distance, mountains rose sharp and purple against the endless sky. Charlotte had never seen so much open space, so much emptiness. Missouri had been green and close trees crowding together, towns within a day's walk of each other. This was different. This was a land that could swallow a person whole. "It's about an hour's ride," Garrett said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. "The main house is at the center of the property. Bunkhouse for the hands is beyond it, and there's a smaller cabin where I've been living." "Where will we stay?" Charlotte asked, her voice carefully neutral. "You and the children will take the main house. It's large, plenty of room for all of you. I'll stay in the foreman's cabin." Charlotte glanced at him, surprised. "Will they resent me?" Garrett considered this. "Probably at first, but you show them you can cook and keep house. They'll come around. Cowboys are simple that way. Feed them well, treat them fair, and they'll follow you anywhere." The ranch came into view over the next rise, and Charlotte's breath caught, despite herself. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure painted white with green shutters, a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. Behind it stood a massive barn, red paint, weathered but solid. Beyond that, she could see the bunkhouse, smaller outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and in the distance, cattle spreading across the grassland like a living carpet. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed from the wagon bed. It was more than beautiful. It was prosperity, stability, everything Charlotte had been chasing since her parents died and left her to navigate a world that had no patience for orphaned girls with younger siblings to raise. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. The porch steps were swept clean, the windows sparkling in the afternoon sun. Someone had been maintaining it even with William gone. "I've kept it up," Garrett said as if reading her thoughts. "Didn't seem right to let it fall into disrepair." He helped Charlotte down, his hands large and warm on her waist, steadying her as her feet found the ground. That same jolt she'd felt during the kiss sparked through her again, unexpected and unwelcome. This was a business arrangement. She couldn't afford to feel anything more. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and fresh air. The main floor held a spacious sitting room, a formal dining room, and an enormous kitchen with a cast-iron stove that looked complicated enough to require an engineering degree. Upstairs, Charlotte discovered 4 bedrooms, each furnished simply but comfortably. "The master bedroom is yours," Garrett said, standing in the doorway of the largest room. "It has the best view, overlooks the ranch. William's things are still in the wardrobe. I can clear them out if you'd prefer." Charlotte walked to the window. From here, she could see the entire property spread out below, a kingdom of grass and cattle and endless sky. A kingdom that was now, at least on paper, partly hers. "Leave them for now," she said quietly. "It feels wrong to erase him so quickly. He was a good man, would have been kind to you, I think. You cared for him. He gave me a job when I needed one. Taught me everything about ranching. Never asked about my past or where I'd come from. Just offered work and a place to belong." Garrett's voice was rough with emotion. "Yeah, I cared for him." They stood there in silence, 2 people bound by a dead man's unfulfilled wishes, and Charlotte wondered what William Blackwood would think of this arrangement. Would he approve, or would he see it as a mockery of what he'd hoped to find? The children's voices rose from downstairs, excited exploration drowning out melancholy thoughts. Charlotte turned from the window, forcing brightness into her tone. "I should get them settled, and I suppose I should see about dinner. 15 ranch hands, you said. They'll be coming in hungry around 6. Kitchen stocked. Maria left her recipes and notes, should help you get started." "I'll manage." Garrett nodded, started to leave, then paused. "Charlotte, Mrs. Stone, thank you for agreeing to this. I know it's not ideal." "Nothing about my life has been ideal, Mr. Stone, but we make do with what we have." She met his eyes. "I'll keep my end of the bargain. You have my word." "Never doubted it." He left then, his boots heavy on the stairs, and Charlotte heard the front door close behind him. Through the window, she watched him walk toward the smaller cabin, his shoulders set in that particular way lonely people carry themselves, braced against a world that had already taken too much. She understood that posture, had worn it herself for 6 months after James died, before desperation had driven her to answer a mail-order bride advertisement from a man she'd never met. And now here she was, married again to another stranger in a land so foreign it might as well be another country. But at least her siblings were safe. At least they had food and shelter, and the promise of something better than the poverty that had been chasing them since their parents' wagon overturned on a muddy Missouri road 3 months ago. That had to be enough. The first weeks at Red Mesa Ranch passed in a blur of backbreaking work and careful navigation of unspoken rules. Charlotte rose before dawn each day to start breakfast for the ranch hands. Massive quantities of biscuits and bacon and eggs and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The men ate in the bunkhouse dining hall, a rough space with long tables and benches, and Charlotte served them with quiet efficiency, learning their names and preferences, earning their grudging respect one meal at a time. Ben worked alongside the hands, learning to rope and brand, coming home each night exhausted, but glowing with the pride of doing man's work. Lily helped Charlotte in the kitchen, her quick mind memorizing recipes and techniques. Grace tended the chickens with a devotion that bordered on religious, naming each bird and mourning dramatically when one ended up in the stew pot. And Rose, now steady on her toddling legs, brought chaos and joy in equal measure, charming even the gruffest cowboys with her gap-toothed smile. Garrett kept his distance, maintaining the boundaries they'd agreed upon. He came to the main house only for business discussions about ranch operations, supplies, needed decisions to be made. Their conversations were polite, professional, the careful dance of 2 people determined not to acknowledge the strange intimacy of their situation. But Charlotte noticed things, the way Garrett always checked to make sure she had enough firewood before winter truly set in. The way he'd quietly repaired the loose step on the back porch without being asked. The way his eyes would find Rose when she played in the yard, something painfully soft in his expression, before he'd catch himself and look away. He was kind. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly kind, in a way Charlotte's first husband had never been. James had been dutiful, had provided for her in the cold transactional way one might house a servant. But Garrett's kindness was different. It asked for nothing in return. That scared her more than cruelty would have. October gave way to November, and the first real cold snap hit Montana with teeth that bit deep. Charlotte woke one morning to find frost patterns on the windows and Ben already gone to help with the cattle. She was starting the breakfast fires when she heard shouts from outside, urgent and alarmed. She ran to the door still in her nightdress and shawl and saw ranch hands running toward the barn. Something had happened. Something bad. "Stay inside," she ordered Lily, who'd appeared at her shoulder. "Keep the little ones here." Charlotte grabbed a coat and ran across the yard, her bare feet already going numb in the cold morning air. She reached the barn to find a cluster of men standing around something on the ground. Someone lying on the ground. "Garrett," she breathed, pushing through the crowd. He was conscious but clearly in pain, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. One of the hands, a grizzled cowboy named Pete, was kneeling beside him. "Fell from the ladder," Pete said grimly. 12 feet, landed hard, might have broken something. "I'm fine," Garrett gritted out, trying to sit up and immediately going pale with the effort. "You're not fine, you stubborn fool." Charlotte dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already checking for injuries with the methodical efficiency she'd learned caring for James during his final illness. "Pete helped me get him to the cabin carefully." "Ma'am, you're barefoot," one of the younger hands pointed out. "Then someone fetch my boots. Move." They carried Garrett to his cabin, a space Charlotte had never entered, and laid him on the narrow bed. It was spartanly furnished, bed, table, chair, a shelf of books, nothing personal. Nothing that spoke of the man who lived here beyond his determination to exist with the minimum required for survival. Charlotte cleaned the head wound first, her hands steady, despite the way her heart was hammering. It wasn't deep enough to need stitching, thank God, but it would scar. His left arm worried her more. The way he held it, the angle suggested a break, or at least a severe sprain. "I need to check your ribs," she said. "I'm fine. Humor me." She felt along his rib cage through his shirt, and Garrett sucked in a sharp breath when she pressed on his left side. Cracked probably, but not broken through. He'd be in pain for weeks, but would heal. "You could have died," she said quietly, still touching his ribs perhaps longer than medically necessary, feeling the heat of his skin through the thin cotton, the solid reality of him. "I've survived worse." "That's not the point." She pulled her hands back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of this moment alone in his cabin, her nightdress barely decent under the borrowed coat, her hands on his bare skin. "You can't just... Can't what work? It's a ranch, Charlotte. Accidents happen. You could have been killed, and I..." She stopped, shocked at the emotion threatening to choke her. "We need you. The ranch needs you. I can't run this place alone." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. "You're worried about the ranch." "Of course I'm worried about the ranch. What else would I be worried about?" His gaze held hers, and Charlotte felt heat rising to her cheeks. She stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You need to rest. I'll send Ben to town for the doctor." "Don't need a doctor. You need someone to set that arm properly, and it's not going to be me. Ben goes to town, and that's final." To her surprise, Garrett didn't argue further. He just nodded, something that might have been amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, ma'am, whatever you say, Mrs. Stone." The use of her married name spoken in that low rumble of his voice did something strange to Charlotte's insides. She fled the cabin before he could see the confusion that must be written all over her face. The doctor came, confirmed Charlotte's assessment, splinted Garrett's arm, and prescribed rest. For 3 days, Garrett was confined to his cabin, and Charlotte found herself making excuses to check on him, bringing him meals, changing his bandages, sitting by his bedside while he slept fitfully, the pain keeping him from real rest. On the third evening, she arrived with dinner to find him awake, propped against the headboard, reading a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "I didn't take you for a poetry man," Charlotte said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "My wife loved poetry. She'd read to me in the evenings." Garrett's voice was soft with memory. "After she died, I kept her books. Seemed wrong to get rid of them." Charlotte sat in the chair beside the bed, drawn despite herself. What was she like, your wife? Catherine. Garrett said the name like a prayer. She was fire and conviction and absolute certainty about what was right and wrong. She made me want to be better than I was. Made me believe I could be. How did you meet? Church social. I was 22 working as a ranch hand, too proud and too stupid to know I knew nothing about anything. She was the minister's daughter, supposed to marry some banker's son her father had picked out. But she chose me instead. He smiled, but it was edged with pain. Her family never forgave her for that. Said she was throwing her life away on a cowboy with no prospects. But you built a life together. We did. Bought this land together, built the cabin with our own hands. She got pregnant right away and we were so happy. Terrified, but happy. His voice roughened. And then the fever came. Charlotte reached out without thinking, her hand covering his. I'm sorry. It was 7 years ago. You'd think it would hurt less by now. Does it? Garrett looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. Sometimes, and then something will remind me, and it's like it just happened yesterday. The smell of lavender, a certain quality of light, the sound of a baby crying. Charlotte thought of Rose, who Garrett was so gentle with and understood. Every time he looked at her baby sister, he saw his lost daughter. James, my first husband, I didn't love him, Charlotte heard herself say. Our marriage was arranged after my parents died. He was 55, I was 18. He needed a housekeeper, I needed security for my siblings. It was a transaction, nothing more. Did he treat you well? He wasn't cruel, just indifferent. I was furniture to him, useful but not cherished. When he died, I felt nothing but relief, and then guilt for feeling relieved. She looked at Garrett. Is that terrible? It's honest. They sat in silence, her hand still covering his, and Charlotte felt something shifting between them. Some wall crumbling, some distance closing. It terrified her. I should go, she said, pulling her hand back. You need rest. Charlotte, Garrett's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for taking care of me. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. We're partners, remember. Partners take care of each other. Is that what we are? Charlotte looked back at him. This man who'd saved her family, who'd married her to give them security, who asked for nothing but honest work in return. This man she was increasingly afraid she might be falling in love with. I don't know what we are, she said honestly, but we're something. She left before he could respond, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel anything for Garrett Stone beyond gratitude and respect. It was an arrangement, a business transaction, a marriage in name only. So why did it feel like something infinitely more dangerous? November slid into December, and Charlotte's fears proved prophetic. She couldn't stop noticing Garrett. The way he moved, economical and sure despite the healing arm. The way he listened when people talked, really listened like their words mattered. The way he was unfailingly gentle with Rose but pushed Ben to be better, stronger, more capable. The way his gaze would find Charlotte across the ranch yard, and for just a moment before he remembered to look away, she'd see something that made her breath catch. And then on a cold December morning, the stranger arrived. Charlotte was in the kitchen preparing bread when she heard horses approaching. She went to the window and saw a well-dressed man on a fine bay gelding, flanked by two rough-looking companions. Something about them made her uneasy. Garrett must have felt it too because he emerged from the barn, his posture alert, defensive. The stranger dismounted, brushing dust from his expensive coat, with the air of a man accustomed to finer surroundings. Charlotte moved to the porch, drying her hands on her apron. Lily appeared at her elbow, always watchful. Can I help you? Garrett's voice carried across the yard. I'm looking for Mrs. Charlotte Stone. I'm told she resides here. You found her. Charlotte stepped forward. Stepped forward. I'm Charlotte Stone, and you are... The stranger turned, and Charlotte saw cold calculation in his eyes. Clayton Blackwood, William's nephew. The words hit like stones. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Garrett had said William had no close family, no heir. But here stood someone claiming kinship, and from the predatory gleam in his eyes, he wanted something. I wasn't aware William had a nephew, Garrett said, his voice carefully neutral. My father was William's older brother. Died 20 years ago. Uncle William and I weren't close, but blood is blood. Clayton's smile didn't reach his eyes. I came as soon as I heard about his death. Took a while for the news to reach Denver. What do you want, Mr. Blackwood? Charlotte asked. Want why I want what's rightfully mine. Red Mesa Ranch. As William's closest living relative, I inherit his property under territorial law. Clayton pulled papers from his coat. I have documentation proving my claim. I've filed with the territorial court. Sheriff Morrison is on his way to discuss the situation. Charlotte's world tilted. The ranch belongs to me. I was engaged to marry William. But you didn't marry William, did you, Mrs. Stone, or should I say Mrs. Hayes? Clayton's voice dripped venom. William died before you arrived. Very convenient timing, I must say. What are you implying? Garrett stepped forward, his body language threatening. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. My uncle dies suddenly right before his mail-order bride arrives. Then within days she marries the foreman and claims widow's rights to a $50,000 property. It's quite a scheme. It's not a scheme, Charlotte said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. I came here in good faith. Garrett married me to protect me, to honor William's wishes. How noble. Clayton's smile was a razor. Tell me, Mrs. Stone, did you poison my uncle? Were you and the foreman lovers before William died, planning to steal his ranch? Garrett lunged forward, but Charlotte's hand on his arm stopped him. Don't, she whispered. That's what he wants. Violence he can use against us. Clayton laughed. Smart woman. Too bad you're also a criminal. The sheriff will be here tomorrow to begin his investigation. If you're innocent, you'll cooperate, unless you have something to hide. He remounted his horse, tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. I'll be staying at the Silver Spoon in town. When the court rules in my favor, and it will, I expect you and your urchins off my property within 24 hours. And you, Stone, consider yourself fired. He rode away, his companions following, leaving Charlotte and Garrett standing in the cold morning air, the foundation of their carefully constructed life cracking beneath their feet. He can't do this, Charlotte said. Can he? If he's really William's nephew and there's no will, territorial law might side with him. Garrett's jaw was tight. We need a lawyer. We can't afford a lawyer. Then we fight without one, together. Charlotte looked at this man who'd become so much more than a business arrangement and felt her heart clench with fear. Not for herself, but for him. For what this might cost him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've brought you nothing but trouble. Garrett turned to her, his green eyes fierce. You brought me back to life. Everything else is just noise. He strode toward the barn, leaving Charlotte standing alone, her heart full of words she couldn't say, and fears she couldn't voice. Because Clayton Blackwood was right about one thing. From the outside, this looked exactly like a scheme to steal a ranch, and proving otherwise might be impossible. Sheriff Morrison arrived the next morning with Clayton Blackwood riding smugly beside him. The sheriff was an older man, weathered and fair, someone Garrett had known for years. But law was law, and Morrison's face was grave as he dismounted. Garrett, Mrs. Stone, he nodded to each of them. I wish this was a social call. So do I, Frank. Garrett stood on the porch of the main house, Charlotte beside him, presenting a united front. What's this about? Mr. Blackwood here has filed a formal complaint with the territorial court. Claims fraud, possible conspiracy to commit theft. I'm obligated to investigate. Morrison's discomfort was evident. I'll need to interview both of you, separately. Clayton dismounted his expensive boots, hitting the dirt with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. I want a full accounting of ranch assets, and I want to inspect William's personal effects. There should be a will. If these two destroyed it, that's evidence of criminal intent. There was no will, Garrett said. William died intestate. Everyone in town knows that. How convenient. And how thoroughly did you search Stone? Or were you too busy seducing your new bride to bother? Garrett's hands clenched into fists, but Charlotte's touch on his arm stopped him from lunging forward. She stepped between them, her spine straight, her voice cold as Montana winter. Sheriff Morrison, my husband and I will cooperate fully with your investigation. We have nothing to hide, but I'll ask you to control Mr. Blackwood's tongue. Slander is also against the law. Morrison nodded approvingly. Ma'am, Clayton, keep it civil or I'll conduct this investigation without you. The interviews began. Morrison took Charlotte first, leading her to the ranch office while Garrett paced the porch like a caged animal. Ben appeared from the barn, his face dark with worry. What's happening? Legal trouble. Clayton's trying to claim the ranch, says our marriage is fraud. Is it? Ben's question was blunt. Garrett met the boy's eyes. Started as an arrangement. became something more. That's not fraud, that's life. You love her. It wasn't a question, but Garrett answered anyway. Yeah, I do. Ben studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. She deserves someone who loves her. James sure didn't. Inside the office, Charlotte sat across from Sheriff Morrison, her hands folded in her lap, projecting a calm she didn't feel. When did you first contact William Blackwood? Morrison asked, his pencil poised over a notepad. I answered his advertisement in the street, Lewis newspaper in July. He wrote back 2 weeks later. How many letters did you exchange? 3. He sent 3, I sent 3. Morrison wrote this down. What did these letters contain? His described the ranch, his age, his health. He was honest about wanting companionship, not romance. He mentioned his previous engagement had ended badly 40 years ago, and he'd never married. He said he had no children, no close family. Charlotte's voice remained steady. My letters told him about my siblings, about James's death, about needing security for my family. William wrote back that family was welcome, that the ranch was large enough for all of us. Did you know Garrett Stone before arriving in Montana? No, sir. I'd never heard his name until William mentioned him in his final letter, said his foreman would meet me at the station. When did your relationship with Mr. Stone begin? Charlotte chose her words carefully. Garrett married me 2 days after I arrived. It was a legal arrangement to protect my rights and give my siblings security. We were strangers fulfilling a practical need. And when did it become more than that? The question hung in the air. Charlotte thought of all the small moments that had built between them. The way Garrett had defended her to Henderson, the concern in his eyes when he'd checked if she had enough firewood, the gentleness with which he taught Ben to rope cattle, the afternoon she'd tended his injuries and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. I don't know exactly when, she said honestly. It happened gradually. We worked together, talked together, built something together. Somewhere in there it stopped being pretend. Morrison nodded, making notes. Did you know William Blackwood was wealthy? I knew he owned a ranch. The letters mentioned 3,000 acres and cattle. I didn't know the dollar value until Clayton said 50,000 yesterday. That's a powerful motivation for fraud. It would be, but if that's what this was. But Sheriff, I came here to marry an old man for security, nothing more. I expected a small ranch, basic comfort, honest work. If I'd wanted wealth, I could have stayed in Missouri and married the banker who'd been courting me since James died. This was news, and Morrison leaned forward. You had other options. Mr. Peterson was 60, wealthy, respected. He offered marriage twice. I declined because he wanted me to put my siblings in an orphanage first. He said children were a burden he wouldn't accept. Charlotte's voice hardened. I chose William because he accepted my family. Not because of money, but because of decency. The interview continued for another hour, Morrison probing every detail of Charlotte's arrival, her marriage to Garrett, the ranch operations. Finally, he set down his pencil. Mrs. Stone, I've known Garrett for 10 years. He's an honest man. But this situation looks suspicious. You understand that I understand, but understanding doesn't make it true. Morrison sighed. I'll be talking to Garrett next. Then I need to inspect William's room, see if there's any evidence of a will or other documents. Charlotte's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Means Clayton has legal authority to manage the property until the court decides ownership. You can stay as Cook Garrett, as a regular hand, but final decisions go through Clayton. He'll destroy everything William built. Maybe, maybe not, but that's the law, ma'am. I'm sorry. Garrett's interview was shorter but no less damaging. Morrison asked about his relationship with William, his knowledge of the mail-order bride arrangement when his feelings for Charlotte had developed. I saw her asking for help and I provided it, Garrett said. Same as William would have done. Mighty convenient you marrying her right after William died. Mighty convenient for who I was foreman of this ranch with a steady job and no complications. Marrying Charlotte brought me nothing but trouble and responsibility. And a claim to $50,000 worth of property. Garrett's jaw tightened. If I wanted William's ranch, I've had 10 years to poison him, forge a will, do any number of things. I didn't because I'm not a thief. I married Charlotte because she needed help and because I was tired of being alone. Everything else is just people seeing conspiracy where there's only coincidence. Morrison closed his notebook. Garrett, I believe you, but believing and proving are different things. The territorial court needs evidence, not character witnesses. Then we'll get evidence. How there's no will. The marriage happened suspiciously fast, and now Clayton's here claiming blood rights that might supersede everything. Morrison stood. I'll do what I can, but prepare yourself. You might lose this fight. Clayton moved into the main house that afternoon, forcing Charlotte and the children into the small servants' quarters off the kitchen. The shift was humiliating, calculated to break her spirit. Clayton took William's bedroom, sat in William's chair, and made it clear this was his domain now. At dinner that first night, he summoned Charlotte to serve him, personally treating her like hired help, rather than the legal wife of the foreman. She complied with icy dignity, serving his food without meeting his eyes. You're a good cook, Mrs. Stone, or should I call you Mrs. Hayes, so hard to keep track of your husbands? Clayton's voice dripped false sympathy upon. Tell me, does Garrett come to your bed at night? Or are you still pretending this marriage is just paperwork? Charlotte's hand trembled on the serving dish, but she kept her voice level. My marriage is none of your concern. Oh, but it is. If you've consummated this fraud, that's evidence of conspiracy. The court will want to know. The court can ask whatever it likes. I'll answer honestly. Will you? Clayton leaned back in his chair. What's honest anymore? You lied about loving William. You're lying about this arrangement with Stone. Maybe you're even lying to yourself about what you really want. Charlotte set down the dish with more force than necessary. Is there anything else, Mr. Blackwood? Yes. Keep your brat siblings away from me, the boy especially. I saw him glaring at me from the barn. If he tries anything, I'll have the sheriff arrest him for assault. Fear spiked through Charlotte. Ben's protective instincts were strong, and she'd seen the rage in his eyes when Clayton had insulted her. Ben won't cause trouble. See that he doesn't? It would be unfortunate if your family ended up separated. Orphanages have ways of breaking up siblings, you know, sending them to different homes, different territories. You'd never see them again. The threat was clear. Behave or lose everything. Charlotte left the dining room, her hands shaking, her heart pounding with impotent fury. She found Ben in the barn, mucking stalls with violent energy. I want to kill him, Ben said without preamble. You can't. That's exactly what he wants, violence he can use against us. So we do nothing. Let him steal everything. We fight in court. We prove we're honest. We trust the law. Ben threw down his pitchfork. The law doesn't care about people like us, Charlie. It cares about money and property, and men like Clayton who know how to work the system. He was probably right. But what choice did they have? The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. Clayton cut wages for all the ranch hands, including Charlotte and the children. He brought in his own men, rough characters, who leered at Charlotte and intimidated the regular hands. He countermanded Garrett's orders, constantly undermining his authority, making it clear that the foreman was now just another worker. Garrett endured it with grim silence, but Charlotte could see the rage building beneath his stoic exterior. Every insult, every humiliation, every casual cruelty toward her or the children, Garrett absorbed it all, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. They barely spoke during this time. Clayton's men were everywhere, watching, reporting back. Any conversation between Charlotte and Garrett could be twisted into evidence of conspiracy. But there were stolen moments, a brush of hands in the barn, a look across the ranch yard that said everything words couldn't. Once late at night, Charlotte found a note tucked into the flower bin. Hold on, we'll survive this. She wrote back, together, and left it where he'd find it. His response came the next day. Always. 1 week before the court hearing, disaster struck. Ben was working with the cattle when one of Clayton's men, a brute named Sykes, made a crude comment about Charlotte. Ben responded with his fists landing a solid punch before other hands pulled them apart. Clayton seized the opportunity. He had Ben dragged to the yard, ordered 10 lashes for insubordination. Ranch justice, he called it. Perfectly legal punishment for a worker who struck a superior. No, Charlotte begged, running from the house. Please, he's just a boy. He's a worker who assaulted my employee. Actions have consequences, Mrs. Hayes. I'll take his punishment. Whip me instead. Clayton's smile was vicious, tempting, but no, the boy needs to learn his place. Garrett was forced to administer the whipping or be fired on the spot. Charlotte watched in horror as he raised the whip, saw the agony in his eyes, the way his hands shook. I'm sorry, he whispered to Ben. Not your fault, Ben gritted out. Do it. 10 lashes. Charlotte counted everyone, her heart breaking with each crack of leather on skin. Ben took it without crying out, his pride holding him together. But when it was done and Garrett cut him down, the boy collapsed, his back a mass of red welts. That night, Charlotte tended Ben's wounds in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Lily helped her young face hard with fury. Grace cried quietly in the corner. And Rose, too young to understand, patted Ben's hand and said, "Owie," over and over. Garrett came to the back door after midnight, his face haggard. "I'm sorry," he said. "God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault. I put the whip to him. That makes it my fault." Charlotte looked at this man who'd shown them nothing but kindness, who was being destroyed piece by circumstances beyond his control. "Clayton did this, not you. Doesn't change how it feels." Ben stirred, opened his eyes. "Mr. Stone, it's all right. I know you had no choice." "That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it survivable." Ben's voice was weak but steady. "We're survivors, all of us. We'll get through this." Garrett's gaze met Charlotte's across the kitchen, and something passed between them. A recognition of shared pain, shared determination. They were bound together now, not by paperwork or arrangement, but by something far stronger. 3 days before the hearing, Clayton called a town meeting to publicly air his accusations. The entire population of Redemption Falls crowded into the community hall, drawn by gossip and the promise of drama. Charlotte sat in the front row, Garrett beside her, facing a room full of judgment. Clayton stood at the podium like a prosecutor, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. "Good people of Redemption Falls, I come before you today to expose a scheme that has defrauded my family and mocked the memory of a good man. My uncle William Blackwood was murdered." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Charlotte's blood ran cold. "I have no proof yet," Clayton continued, "but the circumstances are damning. William dies suddenly right before his mail-order bride arrives. The bride immediately marries the foreman. Together, they claim rights to a $50,000 property. They've had weeks to destroy evidence to craft their story, and now they ask you to believe this is all innocent coincidence." He turned to Charlotte, his finger pointing like an accusation. "This woman is a con artist who targeted my uncle. She and her lover, Garrett Stone, conspired to steal everything William built. And unless we stop them, they'll get away with it." The crowd murmured, some hostile, some uncertain. Charlotte felt the weight of their judgment, the assumption of guilt written on faces she'd seen every week at church. She stood, her legs shaking, but her voice clear. "May I speak?" The room quieted. All eyes turned to her. "You want to know who I am? I'll tell you. I'm a widow. Twice over, though, William died before I could marry him. My first husband was 3 times my age. Our marriage was arranged by my family before they died. James was not unkind, but he was not a husband. He was a landlord who allowed me to live in his house in exchange for keeping it clean." Her voice grew stronger, pain transmuting into defiance. "When James died, his son threw me and my siblings into the street. We had nothing. No family, no money, no prospects. I answered William's advertisement because it promised safety. Not wealth, not luxury, just safety and a roof over our heads." She looked directly at Clayton. "When I arrived and found William dead, Garrett Stone offered me a legal marriage to honor his employer's wishes and protect me from men like you. Men who see a desperate woman and think opportunity. I accepted because the alternative was watching my family starve." Charlotte's eyes swept the room, meeting skeptical gazes and sympathetic ones in equal measure. "I have worked 16-hour days cooking for this town's men. I have asked nothing I haven't earned. I have kept that ranch running while Clayton Blackwood sat in Denver, ignoring his uncle for 40 years, only appearing when there was money to claim." She pointed at Clayton. "You want to talk about fraud? You never visited William, never wrote him, never cared if he lived or died until there was property to inherit. I may have known him only through letters, but I honored his memory by working his land and caring for the men he employed. What have you done except show up with lawyers and accusations?" The crowd's murmur had shifted, less hostile now, more thoughtful. Charlotte pressed her advantage. "So judge me. Call me whatever you like. But know this, everything I've done for my family. And I will fight with everything I have to protect them." She sat down, her heart racing, her hands trembling. Garrett's hand found hers beneath the bench, squeezed once warm and steady. Then Garrett stood and the room hushed. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't, Garrett began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Charlotte Stone is my wife, in law and in my heart. I married her because she needed help and because I wanted to. Not for land, not for money, for her. He turned to face the crowd. I lost my first wife 7 years ago. Lost my daughter 2 days later. Spent 7 years trying to figure out how to keep living when everything I cared about was gone. Then Charlotte walked off that train with 4 scared children and more courage than anyone I have ever known, and something in me woke up. His voice roughened with emotion. I don't know if that's love or just the memory of what love feels like, but I know I'd fight hell itself to keep her and those children safe. If this town wants to judge me for that, go ahead. But don't pretend Clayton Blackwood cares about William's memory. He cares about $50,000. Garrett sat down to silence. Then from the back of the room, one of the ranch hands stood. I worked for William Blackwood for 12 years, the man said. He was fair, decent, cared about his people. He talked about that mail-order bride like she was already family, said he was glad to have young voices on the ranch again. And I've watched Garrett Stone run that place for 10 years. He's the most honest man I know. Another hand stood. Garrett's taught half the young men in this territory how to work cattle. Never asked for anything in return, just passed on what William taught him. That's not the behavior of a thief. Mrs. Patterson, the town clerk, rose. I married them, saw their faces. They were scared, both of them, but honest. You can see dishonesty in people's eyes, and there was none in theirs. One by one, voices rose in defense. Not everyone. There were still those who sided with Clayton, who believed the worst. But enough people spoke up that the tide began to turn. Clayton's face grew red with fury. This is a farce. These people are biased, protecting their own. The court will see through this. Maybe, Sheriff Morrison said from his seat near the front. But the court will also hear what I have to say, and I'm inclined to believe Garrett and Mrs. Stone. The meeting dissolved into argument and debate. Charlotte and Garrett slipped out into the cold December night, the children following. They walked back to the wagon in silence, the weight of the coming court battle pressing down on them. That was brave, Garrett said finally. What you said in there. I'm terrified. Good, means you understand what we're facing. Charlotte stopped, turned to face him. The moonlight caught his features, harsh and beautiful. Garrett, if we lose, if the court rules against us, I want you to know something. Don't. I have to say this in case I don't get another chance. She took a breath. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And whatever the court decides, that's real. This marriage is real. We're real. Garrett's eyes widened. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he pulled her against him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held nothing back. No careful distance, no pretense of arrangement. Just raw need and desperate affection, and 7 years of loneliness finally ending. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he said roughly. Have for weeks. Maybe since that first day, though, I was too stubborn to admit it. Charlotte laughed shakily. We have terrible timing. Yeah, we do. They held each other in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, now facing the possibility of losing everything. But for this moment, they had each other. And that would have to be enough. The court hearing was set for the 15th of December. 2 weeks away, 2 weeks to gather evidence. They didn't have to build a defense against accusations they couldn't entirely disprove. 2 weeks until everything they'd built together would be tested in the cold light of law. As they drove back to the ranch, Charlotte's hand in Garrett, she thought about what she'd said in the town hall, about fighting for her family with everything she had. She'd meant it. Whatever came next, she and Garrett would face it together, and together maybe they'd be strong enough to survive even this. But that night, as Charlotte lay in her small bed in the servants' quarters, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling the same terrible possibilities. What if they lost? What if Clayton won and they were evicted? What would happen to Ben, Lily, Grace, Rose? Where would they go? And Garrett. What would happen to Garrett? The next morning, she woke to find him gone. His horse was missing from the barn. The hands hadn't seen him. Panic clawed at Charlotte's throat as she searched the cabin, the ranch, anywhere he might be. That's when she found the note tucked under a stone on the porch of his cabin. Charlotte, This was my mistake, not yours. I'm setting you free. Tell the court I coerced you into marriage. Claim the baby is from assault if you have to. Save yourself and the children. I'm sorry. I love you. G. The baby. Charlotte's hand went to her stomach where a secret had been growing for the past month. She'd suspected but hadn't been certain until a week ago. Pregnant. With Garrett's child. A consequence of their love confession of the night they'd stopped pretending this was just an arrangement. And now he was gone. No, Charlotte whispered. Then louder. No. She ran to the barn, saddled Clover, the gentlest mare, and rode out before anyone could stop her. She didn't know where he'd turned, but she knew Garrett. He'd head for the property line, trying to put distance between himself and the trouble he thought he'd caused. The pre-dawn air was bitter cold frost crunching under Clover's hooves. Charlotte's nightdress billowed under her coat, her hair flying loose. She didn't care. She had to find him. Had to stop him before he destroyed them both. She saw him at the edge of the ranch, sitting on Thunder, his black geldings staring out at the road that would take him away forever. Garrett Stone! Charlotte screamed, her voice raw with fury and fear. Don't you dare! He turned, shock written across his face. Charlotte, what are you? Get off that horse, now! You shouldn't be out here. It's freezing. You're not even dressed. Get off the horse! Garrett dismounted slowly, and Charlotte urged Clover forward until she was close enough to see his face clearly. Tears tracked through the dust on his cheeks. This strong man was breaking, and it was killing her. You coward, she said, her voice shaking. You think leaving solves anything. You think I can fight for us if you're not here. I'm trying to save you by destroying me. Charlotte slid off. Clover stumbled toward him. You leave and it kills me. Not the court, not Clayton. You. Garrett's face crumpled. I failed Catherine. I'll fail you too. And the baby, his voice broke. God, Charlotte, if something happens to you or the baby because of me, how did you know? I've seen pregnancy before. The way you've been tired, the morning sickness you try to hide, I know. He fell to his knees in the frozen grass. I can't lose another woman I love. I can't watch another baby die. I'd rather leave now than watch that happen. Charlotte knelt in front of him, took his face in her cold hands. Then you're not just running from the court. You're running from us. From me, from this child, from the possibility of being happy. I don't deserve to be happy. Not after Catherine. Catherine died of fever. Charlotte's voice cracked. Not because you failed her. Not because you weren't good enough. Sometimes people die, Garrett. It's not always someone's fault. But I should have. What saved her? How with medicine that didn't exist, with a doctor who came too late. You're not God, Garrett. You're just a man who loved his wife and couldn't stop death from taking her. She pressed her forehead to his. I'm not her. And you're not going to lose me. Not to fever, not to childbirth, not to anything. Because I'm strong and I'm stubborn and I have you beside me. Charlotte, I chose you, she said fiercely. Every day I choose you. And this baby, this child we made together, they're choosing both of us. Don't take that choice away from us. Garrett's arms came around her, crushing her against him. I'm so scared. So am I, but we be scared together. We face everything together. That's what marriage means. Real marriage. Not arrangement, not convenience, but partnership. They knelt there in the frozen grass as the sun rose, holding each other, two broken people, choosing to be whole together. Come home, Charlotte whispered. Please, Garrett, come home. He pulled back, looked at her with eyes full of love and fear and desperate hope. What if we lose in court? Then we lose. But we lose together and we figure out what comes next together. What we don't do is run. Garrett nodded slowly. Together. Always. They rode back to the ranch side by side, the sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And when they arrived, the children were waiting on the porch, Ben's face tight with worry. You came back, Ben said. Of course I came back, Garrett replied, dismounting and helping Charlotte down. This is home. Charlotte watched Garrett's face as he said it, saw the truth settling into him. For 7 years, he'd been a ghost haunting this ranch. But now, finally, he was choosing to live. The court hearing was only 2 days away. Charlotte and Garrett spent that time preparing what defense they could. They gathered William's letters to Charlotte showing his intentions. They compiled testimony from ranch hands willing to speak on their behalf. They documented every hour of work Charlotte had done, proving she'd earned her keep rather than stolen it. But it felt like building a dam with twigs. Clayton had lawyers' documentation, the weight of territorial inheritance law on his side. They had only their word and the hope that truth would be enough. The territorial courthouse in Redemption Falls was a modest building, wood frame like most structures in Montana, but dignified with white paint and green shutters that matched the church across the street. On the morning of December 15th, it was packed to capacity, every bench filled with townspeople, eager to witness the drama that had consumed their community for the past month. Charlotte sat at the defendant's table, Garrett beside her, both dressed in their Sunday best. She wore a dark blue dress she'd sewn from fabric. Garrett had bought her the first new clothing she'd owned in years. The high waist helped hide her growing belly, though she knew it was only a matter of time before everyone knew. He wore a black suit that had belonged to William, altered to fit his broader frame. They looked respectable, dignified, nothing like the desperate conspirators Clayton had painted them to be. Across the aisle, Clayton Blackwood sat with his Denver lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Thornton who'd made his reputation destroying reputations. They exuded confidence, men who believed the law was on their side. Judge Harrison entered and the room rose. He was a circuit judge, 60-some years old, stern-faced, and known for fairness. He'd presided over territorial law for 20 years, seen every kind of case Montana could produce. Claim-jumping, cattle theft, murder, fraud. This case would be just another in a long line. "Be seated," Harrison said, his voice gravelly from years of cigars. "We're here to determine ownership of Red Mesa Ranch, previously belonging to William Blackwood, deceased. Mr. Thornton, you may present your opening statement." Thornton rose, smoothing his expensive suit. "Your Honor, this case is simple. William Blackwood died intestate, leaving no will. Under territorial law, his property passes to his nearest living relative, Clayton Blackwood, his nephew and only surviving kin. The defendants claim marriage rights, but their union is fraudulent, a scheme concocted to steal a $50,000 property." He gestured dramatically toward Charlotte and Garrett. Charlotte Hayes answered a mail-order bride advertisement, but arrived after William's death. Rather than return home, she married the foreman within days and claimed widow's rights she never earned. The speed of this marriage, the convenient timing, the financial motive, all point to conspiracy. Thornton's voice grew harder. "We will prove that Charlotte Hayes is a con artist who targeted an elderly wealthy man, that Garrett Stone aided this scheme for personal gain, and that together they committed fraud against the Blackwood family. We ask the court to dissolve this sham marriage, award the property to its rightful heir, and refer the matter to the sheriff for criminal prosecution." He sat down to murmurs from the crowd. It was a damning picture, Charlotte had to admit. Told that way, stripped of context and humanity, their actions looked exactly like a calculated scheme. Charlotte had no lawyer to deliver a counterstatement. She and Garrett couldn't afford one. So she stood herself, her voice shaking but clear. "Your Honor, my husband and I will represent ourselves. We ask only for the chance to tell the truth. We're not criminals. We're two people who found each other in desperate circumstances and tried to build something honest. If that's a crime, then the law is more broken than I thought." Judge Harrison studied her for a long moment. "Noted, Mrs. Stone. Mr. Thornton, call your first witness." The prosecution's case was methodical and damaging. Thornton called Henderson, the hotel owner, who testified about Charlotte's desperation that first day, how she'd begged for food, then conveniently married the foreman within 48 hours. "Seemed mighty suspicious to me," Henderson said smugly. "Woman shows up claiming to marry William, finds him dead, immediately latches onto the next man with access to property." Garrett had no legal training, but he could cross-examine. "Mr. Henderson, you refused us service that first night, didn't you? Called Mrs. Stone, that sort, and tried to turn away her and 4 hungry children." Henderson's face reddened. "I run a respectable establishment. You run a business that judges people by their clothes and their circumstances. Would you say your testimony might be colored by your initial prejudice against my wife?" "Objection," Thornton called. "Speculation." "Sustained," Harrison said. "But I'll note the witness's bias. Continue." And the banker testified next, establishing the ranch's value and Charlotte's potential financial motive. Then came Dr. Morrison, who'd examined William's body. "Cause of death was heart failure," Morrison said. "Natural as far as I could determine. But you can't rule out poison, Thornton pressed. Certain substances can mimic heart attack symptoms. I can't rule it out completely, no, but I saw no evidence suggesting it. So it's possible William Blackwood was murdered. Morrison hesitated. Possible, but unlikely. William had a weak heart. I'd been telling him for years to take it easy. Charlotte felt cold dread settling in her stomach. They were painting her as a murderer now, not just a con artist. The crowd's whispers grew louder, more hostile. Thornton called Clayton to the stand next. He testified about his relationship with William, making it sound closer than it had been, full of fond memories and family bonds. He painted a picture of a beloved uncle stolen from him by scheming strangers. Did your uncle ever mention Garrett Stone in his correspondence? Thornton asked. Never. I didn't know the man existed until I arrived to claim my inheritance. And Charlotte Hayes? He mentioned her once in his last letter, said he'd sent for a mail-order bride, some widow from Missouri. He sounded uncertain about it, like maybe he was having second thoughts. This was new, and Charlotte leaned forward. That's a lie, she whispered to Garrett. Objection, Garrett called, standing. Mr. Blackwood is testifying to the contents of a letter. Where is this letter? Can we see it? Clayton's smile was razor thin. I'm afraid I don't have it with me. It's in Denver with my other papers. How convenient, Garrett said. Mr. Stone, Judge Harrison's voice held warning, you'll address the court properly or I'll hold you in contempt. Your Honor, I apologize. But this testimony is hearsay without the letter to back it up. Harrison nodded. Sustained, the jury will disregard Mr. Blackwood's characterization of his uncle's feelings. But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. The testimony continued through the morning. Ranch hands called by Clayton testified to the hasty marriage, the suspicious timing. One of Clayton's hired men, the brute Sykes, claimed he'd seen Charlotte and Garrett in intimate conversation before the wedding, suggesting a pre-existing relationship. That's a lie, Charlotte whispered, her face burning. When court broke for lunch, Charlotte and Garrett huddled with the children in a small room adjacent to the courtroom. Ben's face was dark with fury, his healing back a constant reminder of Clayton's cruelty. They're going to rule against us, Ben said. We should run, take the children and disappear before they can arrest you. We're not running, Charlotte said firmly. We haven't done anything wrong. Since when does that matter? Lily spoke up quietly. I found something in the main house when I was cleaning. Everyone turned to look at her. The girl's face was pale but determined. What did you find? Garrett asked. Papers, hidden under a floorboard in Mr. Blackwood's room. I was scrubbing and the board came loose and there was a metal box underneath. She pulled a folded document from her dress pocket. I didn't know if it mattered, but I kept it. Charlotte took the paper with shaking hands, unfolded it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read. It's a will, she breathed. William's last will and testament. Garrett leaned over her shoulder, reading quickly. His face transformed from despair to shocked hope. He left the ranch to me, Garrett said, his voice stunned. In case of his death, Red Mesa goes to me. All of it. Charlotte read further. Special provision. If Garrett is married at time of my death, his wife shall have equal ownership. And there's another clause. If Charlotte Hayes arrives from Missouri as my intended bride and I am deceased, Garrett is requested to assist her and her family, offer them work and shelter for as long as they wish. When is this dated? Ben asked. Charlotte checked. September 8th, 1 week before William died, and it's witnessed by Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Patterson. This changed everything. If the will was genuine, witnessed properly, it meant Garrett inherited the ranch regardless of his marriage to Charlotte. It meant their marriage wasn't about property at all. It meant Clayton got nothing. Why would William hide this? Garrett asked, staring at the document like it might disappear. Lily spoke up. Maybe he wanted to make sure it was safe. Maybe he was worried someone might try to steal it or destroy it if they knew about it. We present this when court reconvenes, Charlotte said, her mind racing. This proves we didn't marry for the property. Garrett already owned it. Our marriage actually cost me potential ownership, since I would have had equal rights if the will had been honored before we wed. When court reconvened, Clayton's lawyer was in the middle of calling character witnesses to disparage Charlotte's reputation when Lily stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, she said, her young voice cutting through the proceedings. I have evidence. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Young lady, you can't just interrupt. Please, Your Honor, Charlotte stood, My sister has found something relevant to this case. We ask permission to present it. Harrison frowned but nodded. Approach the bench. Bring whatever you've found. Charlotte, Garrett, and Lily walked forward together. Charlotte handed the document to the judge, watching his face as he read. His eyebrows rose, and he looked at Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Patterson in the audience. Dr. Morrison, Mrs. Patterson, please approach. The two came forward, curious and confused. Harrison showed them the will. "And this your signature?" he asked each. "Yes, Your Honor," Morrison said, studying the document. "William asked me to witness his will about a week before he died. He was quite particular about it. Wanted to make sure everything was in order." "Same here," Mrs. Patterson added. "He came to my office specifically to have it witnessed properly. He seemed relieved once it was done, like a weight had been lifted." Harrison read aloud, "William left specific instructions. He wanted the will hidden until after his planned wedding to Charlotte Hayes. He told me that if anything happened to him before the wedding, Garrett would find it and honor his wishes to help her family. But if the wedding happened, he planned to present it as a wedding gift to Garrett, showing he had always intended to leave him the ranch." Judge Harrison read the will aloud to the courtroom, his voice carrying every word. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Shock, then understanding, then a shifting of sympathies so palpable that Charlotte could feel it. Clayton lunged to his feet. "That's a forgery. It has to be. Where did they find it? Why wasn't it discovered during the initial search?" "It was hidden," Lily said clearly, "under a loose floorboard in Mr. Blackwood's bedroom. I found it 2 days ago while cleaning. Mr. Blackwood must have put it there for safekeeping." "How convenient," Clayton spat. "Suddenly a will appears right when they need it." "Your Honor, this is obviously fabricated." "The signatures are genuine," Harrison said. "I knew William Blackwood. This is his handwriting, and both witnesses confirm they signed it." He looked at Morrison. "Doctor, you said William specifically requested this be witnessed. Did he give any indication why he was making a will at that particular time?" Morrison nodded. "He said he wanted his affairs in order before Charlotte arrived. Said he'd been putting it off for years, but bringing a new wife into his life made him think about the future. He was excited about it, Your Honor. Talked about having a family on the ranch again, even if it wasn't his own blood." Thornton stood quickly. "Your Honor, even if this will is genuine, it raises questions. Why was it hidden? Why didn't Garrett Stone produce it immediately after William's death?" "Because I didn't know it existed," Garrett said. "William never told me. I assumed he'd died intestate like everyone else." "Or," Thornton countered, "you knew about it but hid it because it complicated your scheme. A will leaving everything to you would make your marriage to Charlotte Hayes look even more suspicious. People might wonder why you married her at all if you already owned the ranch." Charlotte felt sick. Even evidence in their favor was being twisted. But Judge Harrison was studying the will carefully, his legal mind working through implications. "Mr. Thornton, if your theory is correct, why would Mr. Stone marry Charlotte at all? According to this, will he own the ranch outright? Marriage to her gained him nothing. In fact, it gave her equal ownership, which actually reduced his sole claim to the property." Thornton opened his mouth, closed it, searching for a response. Harrison continued, "Furthermore, the will explicitly instructs Mr. Stone to help Charlotte and her family if William died before the wedding. By marrying her and providing for her siblings, he was following William's wishes exactly. Where's the fraud in that?" "Unless they were already lovers," Thornton said desperately. "Unless this was about lust, not property." "Then where's your evidence of that?" Harrison's voice was sharp. "You've spent 2 days throwing accusations around, Mr. Thornton. I've heard testimony about suspicious timing and financial motive, but I haven't seen one piece of concrete evidence that these two people conspired to commit fraud. I haven't seen proof of an affair before William's death. I haven't even seen proof that they benefit improperly from this arrangement. What I have seen is two people trying to survive in difficult circumstances, and a nephew who ignored his uncle for 40 years, suddenly very interested when there's money involved." Clayton's face went purple. "Your Honor, that's—" "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood." Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "This will is properly witnessed and executed. Under territorial law, it supersedes any claims of inheritance by blood relatives. Red Mesa Ranch belongs to Garrett Stone, and as his legally wedded wife, Charlotte Stone has equal ownership." The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, some shouted protests. Clayton was screaming about injustice, about corruption, about appeals he'd file. But through it all, Charlotte heard only the ringing in her ears and the judge's voice declaring them free. Garrett's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. She buried her face against his chest and felt tears streaming down her face, releasing weeks of fear and tension. "It's over," Garrett murmured against her hair. "Charlotte, it's over. We won." But they weren't quite done. Clayton, face twisted with rage, pushed his way toward them through the crowd. "You think you've won," he snarled. "I'll appeal. I'll drag this through every court in the territory. I'll make your lives hell until what?" Sheriff Morrison appeared, blocking Clayton's path. "Until you exhaust your money on lawyers. Until everyone in Montana knows you for the greedy opportunist you are. I'm William's family. That ranch should be mine." "You never visited him," Morrison said quietly. "Not once in the 10 years I've been sheriff here. William used to talk about you, sometimes wondered why you never wrote. Wondered if he'd done something to offend you. And now you show up the moment there's property to claim, with accusations and lawyers and not one word of grief for the man himself." Clayton's mouth worked soundlessly. Morrison continued, "I've also been looking into that letter you claim to have. The one where William supposedly expressed doubts about Charlotte. I sent it to a document examiner in Helena. Got the report back yesterday." He pulled papers from his coat. "The handwriting doesn't match any of William's known letters. But it does match a contract you signed at the land office in town last month when you tried to buy property here. You forged a letter from your dead uncle to support your fraud accusations." The courtroom went silent. Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. That's absurd," Clayton stammered. "I would never—" "You forged evidence, Mr. Blackwood. That's a crime. And given your substantial gambling debts in Denver, it's clear you needed that ranch money desperately enough to manufacture a case." Morrison pulled out handcuffs. "Clayton Blackwood, you're under arrest for forgery and fraud." As Morrison led Clayton away, still protesting, still threatening appeals and lawsuits that would never materialize, Charlotte felt the last of her fear drain away. It was really over. They'd won not just the legal battle, but the moral one. The truth had come out, and it had set them free. Outside the courthouse, the December sun was bright despite the cold. Ranch hands clapped Garrett on the back, congratulating him. Townspeople who doubted offered awkward apologies to Charlotte. Mrs. Patterson hugged her warmly. "I'm glad it worked out," the older woman said. "William would be happy. He always said Garrett was like the son he never had. And he would have loved you dear, I can tell." The children surrounded them, Rose toddling into Charlotte's arms, Grace and Lily hugging her waist, Ben shaking Garrett's hand with the solemnity of one man congratulating another. "We did it," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it." "You did it," Garrett corrected. "Lily finding that, well, that saved us." Lily blushed. "I was just cleaning." "You were paying attention," Charlotte said. "Being thorough, that matters." They drove back to Red Mesa Ranch as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in shades of crimson and gold. The land looked different now, Charlotte thought. Not because it had changed, but because she finally felt like she belonged here. This was home. Not just shelter, not just safety, but genuinely home. That night, after the children were in bed, Charlotte and Garrett stood on the porch of the main house, looking out over the ranch they now legally owned together. "I can't quite believe it's real," Charlotte said. "That we won, that we're safe." "Believe it." Garrett's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. "You're my wife. This is our ranch. That's as real as it gets." Charlotte turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight. "There's something else that's real, something I need to tell you." "I know," Garrett said gently. "The baby." "You knew." "I've seen pregnancy before, Charlotte. I know the signs." His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. "I should have said something sooner, but I was terrified. Still am, if I'm honest. Of losing me like you lost Catherine. Of losing both of you." His voice broke. "I can't go through that again." Charlotte covered his hand with hers. "Then we won't let that happen. I'm strong, Garrett. Stronger than you think. And I have you and Dr. Morrison and a whole ranch full of people who care about us. I'm not Catherine, and this baby isn't Grace. We're going to be fine." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight with everything I have, and I can promise you won't face it alone." She stood on her toes, kissed him softly. "We're in this together. Always." Garrett pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear. I love you, both of you. We love you too. They stood there under the Montana stars, and, for the first time since Catherine's death, Garrett allowed himself to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have this. A wife who loved him, a child on the way, a future that held more than just memory and regret. Winter gave way to spring, and life at Red Mesa Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Charlotte's pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to Garrett's cautious relief. Dr. Morrison checked on her, regularly pronouncing both mother and baby healthy and strong. Ben continued to grow into a capable young man under Garrett's tutelage, learning not just cattle work, but ranch management, preparing for the day he might run his own spread. Lily's cooking skills rivaled Charlotte's now, and she'd started teaching Grace, passing knowledge down through the generations. Grace's chicken flock had grown to over 50 birds, and she'd become the ranch's unofficial expert on poultry. And Rose, now 2 years old, was everyone's darling, running wild across the ranch with a fearlessness that both terrified and delighted them all. The ranch prospered. With Clayton gone and the legal battles behind them, Garrett and Charlotte could focus on building rather than defending. They hired more hands, expanded the cattle operation, repaired fences and buildings that had been neglected. The place hummed with life and purpose. But as Charlotte's belly swelled and June approached, Garrett's anxiety grew. He tried to hide it, but Charlotte saw through him. The way he watched her constantly as if she might vanish. The way he insisted she rest, even when she felt perfectly capable of working. The nightmares that woke him gasping Catherine's name. I'm not going to bow, Charlotte told him one evening in late May, taking his face in her hands. You have to stop living like I'm already a ghost. I'm trying. Try harder. This baby needs a father who's present, not paralyzed by fear. Garrett nodded, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. Charlotte understood. Some scars went too deep for words alone to heal. Only time and lived experience would prove to him that this time could be different. Labor began on a warm June evening, right as the ranch hands were coming in for supper. Charlotte's water broke in the kitchen contractions, starting almost immediately afterward. Get Dr. Morrison, Garrett said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Ben, ride hard. Tell him it's started. Ben didn't need to be told twice. He was on a horse and galloping toward town before Charlotte could draw another breath. Garrett helped Charlotte upstairs, his hands shaking. You're going to be fine. You're strong. You're going to be fine. I know, Charlotte said, though a contraction made her gasp. But you need to breathe, Garrett. You're going to pass out if you don't breathe. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, bringing a midwife from town named Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman with iron gray hair and hands that had delivered half the babies in the territory. Out, Mrs. Chen said to Garrett. You wait downstairs. I'm not leaving her. Yes, you are. I've delivered 100 babies, young man, and I've never yet had a husband be helpful during labor. Out. Garrett looked at Charlotte, who nodded weakly. I'll be fine. Take care of the children. They'll be scared. He went, but Charlotte could hear him pacing the hallway just outside the door, his boots wearing a path in the floorboards. The labor was long, longer than Charlotte had expected, though Mrs. Chen assured her this was normal for a first baby. 18 hours of pain that seemed to go on forever. Charlotte gripping the midwife's hands, listening to Garrett's footsteps outside, to Dr. Morrison's calm voice offering encouragement. Around hour 16, things got difficult. Charlotte was exhausted, the contractions overwhelming, and she started to hemorrhage. Blood soaked the sheets more than there should be. How bad? Charlotte gasped. Dr. Morrison's face was grave. Charlotte, I need to be honest with you. The bleeding is significant. I'm doing everything I can to control it, but if it doesn't stop soon, I may have to make a choice. What kind of choice? Between saving you or the baby. Ice flooded Charlotte's veins. The baby. Their child, the product of love, not duty, the proof that second chances were real. But if she died, what happened to Garrett? To Ben, Lily, Grace, Rose, who would care for them? What would you advise? She whispered. That's not my choice to make. But Charlotte, if I had to choose, I'd choose you. You're my patient. You're the one I can save with certainty. Charlotte's hand went to her swollen belly, feeling the baby moving inside her. This child who deserved a chance at life. But so did she. So did the family who needed her. If it comes to that choice, Charlotte said, tears streaming down her face, save me. God forgive me, but save me. Morrison nodded. I'll do everything I can to save you both. He returned to work, and Charlotte found a strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd survived poverty, widowhood, scandal, and legal battles. She'd be damned if childbirth would defeat her. Nobody's dying today, she gritted out through clenched teeth. Not me, not this baby. Nobody. She pushed with everything she had, channeling all her stubborn determination into bringing this child into the world. Morrison coached her. Mrs. Chen wiped her forehead, and outside she could hear Garrett's voice, ragged with fear, praying to a God he probably didn't believe in anymore. Please, he was saying, please don't take her. Take me instead if you need someone, but don't take her. Don't take them. And the baby crowned. Morrison urged her on. One more push. Just one more. Charlotte bore down, feeling like she was being split in two, and then suddenly, blessedly, there was release. A cry filled the room, high and strong and indignant. It's a boy, Mrs. Chen said, tears streaming down her weathered face. Charlotte, you have a son. They cleaned the baby cut. The cord wrapped him in a soft blanket while Morrison tended to Charlotte. The bleeding slowed, stopped. The danger passed. Crisis averted. Mother and child would both live. Dr. Morrison opened the door, and Garrett practically fell into the room, his face haggard with sleeplessness and fear. Charlotte is fine, Morrison said, smiling for the first time in hours. They're both fine. You have a son, Garrett. Mrs. Chen placed the baby in Charlotte's arms. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face. Dark hair like hers, but those were definitely Garrett's eyes, that particular shade of green. The baby yawned, stretched tiny fists, and settled against her chest like he'd always belonged there. Garrett approached slowly, as if moving through a dream. He looked at the baby, at Charlotte, and tears streamed down his face unashamedly. He's perfect, Garrett whispered. You're both perfect. Want to hold your son? Garrett's hands shook as he took the baby, supporting the tiny head with a gentleness that belied his size. He stared down at the child, and Charlotte watched as something shifted in his face. Healing. Finally, after 7 years of guilt and grief, healing. What should we name him? Charlotte asked. Garrett looked at her, then back at the baby. William. William Garrett Stone. After the man who made all this possible. William, Charlotte repeated, trying it out. The baby made a small noise as if approving his name. Billy. The children were allowed in one at a time. Rose now, too, was fascinated by the tiny baby, wanting to touch his hands, his feet, everything. Grace declared him the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Lily cried happy tears and promised to help however Charlotte needed. And Ben, 16 now and trying hard to be grown up, looked at his nephew and smiled. He's lucky, Ben said, growing up here with all of us, with parents who actually love each other. Garrett's hand found Ben's shoulder. You're my son too, you know. All of you. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that matters just as much. That night, after everyone had left, and it was just the three of them, Charlotte and Garrett and baby William, they lay together in the big bed. The baby slept in the cradle beside them, his breathing soft and even. Garrett's arm was around Charlotte, and she'd never felt safer or more content. We made it, she said softly. Through everything, we made it. We did more than make it. We built something beautiful. Garrett kissed the top of her head. I love you, Charlotte Stone. You and our children. All of them. I love you too. The years that followed were full ones. Charlotte and Garrett had 3 more children, a daughter they named Catherine Grace, honoring Garrett's first family and showing that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting those who came before. A son named James, because even loveless marriages deserve some remembrance, and Charlotte wanted her first husband's memory honored. And a surprise late baby, another daughter named Hope, who came when Charlotte was 35 and Garrett was 58. Red Mesa Ranch prospered beyond anything William Blackwood could have imagined. Under Garrett and Charlotte's joint management, it grew to 10,000 acres, one of the most successful operations in Montana. They built a schoolhouse on the property so their children and those of their workers could get an education. They established a tradition of opening their doors each winter to anyone who needed shelter, remembering what it felt like to be desperate and cold. Ben grew into a fine man, eventually starting his own ranch on land Charlotte and Garrett helped him purchase. Thunder Creek Ranch, he called it, and it bordered Red Mesa to the north. He married a school teacher from Billings, a kind woman who'd been widowed young herself, and together they had 5 children who visited Red Mesa every Sunday. Lily married the deputy sheriff's son and ran the general store in Redemption Falls, her sharp mind perfect for business. She and her husband had 4 children, and Lily made sure each of them learned to read and write and do figures, passing on the education Charlotte had ensured she received. Grace became a doctor, the first woman doctor in Montana Territory. It wasn't easy fighting prejudice and skepticism at every turn, but Grace had inherited Charlotte's stubborn determination and Garrett's quiet strength. She ran a clinic that served 3 counties, never married, but found fulfillment in saving lives the way Dr. Morrison had saved hers. And Rose, who'd been just a baby when they arrived at Red Mesa, grew into a beautiful woman who married young Samuel Fletcher, creating delicious irony that made the whole family laugh. Samuel, who'd once courted Charlotte, found true love with her baby sister instead. They had 6 children and a ranch of their own, building a legacy that honored both families. Charlotte and Garrett's own children followed their own paths. William became a rancher like his father, eventually taking over day-to-day operations of Red Mesa when Garrett's back and knees started giving him trouble. Catherine Grace became a teacher, spreading knowledge to the next generation. James became a lawyer, fighting for the rights of homesteaders and small ranchers against the big cattle companies. And Hope, their surprise blessing, became a writer documenting the stories of Montana's pioneers so they wouldn't be forgotten. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Charlotte and Garrett sat on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching the sun set over the land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Their children and grandchildren filled the ranch 3 generations now, all stemming from a desperate bargain made in a train station 40 years ago. "Do you ever think about that day," Charlotte asked, "when I stepped off the train with nothing but 4 scared children and $3? "Every day," Garrett said. "Best day of my life. Not the day we married. That was good too, but the real miracle was the day I saw you and decided to help instead of walking away. Everything good in my life came from that choice." Charlotte took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 4 decades of practice. They were old now, Garrett 82 and Charlotte 59, but the love between them had only grown stronger with time. "I used to think I was unlucky," Charlotte said softly. "Parents died forced into a loveless marriage, widowed and desperate. But all of that brought me here, to you, to this life. Maybe I was lucky all along and just couldn't see it." "We made our own luck," Garrett replied, "together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Charlotte thought about the young woman who'd asked a stranger for his leftovers in a restaurant and the man who'd said, "They're with me," and changed everything. They'd started as strangers bound by necessity, became partners through shared struggle, and ended as soulmates who'd built an empire of love and family on the foundation of one kind choice. And 40 years later, they were still choosing each other, every single day. That same evening, as the celebration wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed, Garrett took his evening walk around the property. Old habit, checking fences and gates even though the hands had already done it. Charlotte watched him go, smiling at his stubbornness. He was near the main road when he saw them. A young woman, maybe 25, with 2 small children, sitting beside a broken-down wagon. They looked exhausted, desperate, lost. Garrett approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Evening, ma'am. Looks like you've had some trouble." The woman looked up, her face tight with fear and pride warring for dominance. "Our wagon broke an axle. I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but could you help us? We've nowhere else to go." Garrett saw Charlotte in this woman's eyes, saw himself 40 years ago facing the choice to help or walk away. He smiled. "Come on up to the house," he said. "My wife will have supper ready. We'll fix your wagon in the morning. For tonight, you're our guests." The woman's shock was palpable. "Sir, we can't pay." "Didn't ask you to." Garrett held out his hand to help her up. Sometimes people just need help. And sometimes, if you're lucky, helping someone changes your whole life. As they walked back to the ranch house, the woman and her children following uncertainly, Garrett saw Charlotte standing on the porch. She'd been watching. She understood immediately, and her smile told him she approved. They'd been saved by kindness 40 years ago. Now they had the chance to pass it forward, to be for someone else what Garrett had been for Charlotte all those years ago. Full circle, the way the best stories always ended and began again. Charlotte came down the porch steps to greet their unexpected guests, and as Garrett watched her welcome these strangers with the same warmth she brought to everything, he felt Catherine's presence one last time. Not the grief and guilt that had haunted him for so long, but something gentler. Approval. blessing, permission to be fully, completely happy with the life he'd built. Thank you, he whispered to Catherine's memory, for making me the man who could do this, the man who could love Charlotte and be loved in return. And then he let the ghost go, released the last hold the past had on him, and walked toward his future, toward Charlotte and their children and their grandchildren, and these new strangers who might become family too. Because that was what love did. It grew. It multiplied. It reached out and pulled people in until the circle was so large it could hold the whole world. And it all started with a simple choice to see another person's pain and decide to help. Charlotte Hayes had arrived in Montana with nothing but desperation and hope. She left this world 60 years later as Charlotte Stone, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that had touched hundreds of lives through their kindness and generosity. When she died at 79 with Garrett holding her hand, her last words were, "We saved each other." And Garrett, 102 years old and ready to finally rest, whispered back, "We did, and we had a beautiful life doing it." He followed her 6 months later, dying quietly in his sleep in the house they'd built together. They buried him beside her on the hill overlooking Red Mesa Ranch, where William Blackwood had been laid to rest so many decades before. 3 generations gathered for the funeral. Ben's great-grandchildren, Lily's descendants, Grace's students, and the patients whose lives she'd saved Rose's sprawling family, and of course William Catherine James and Hope's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Young William Stone III Garrett and Charlotte's great-grandson stood at the graveside and told the story his grandmother Hope had written down years ago. The story of a desperate woman who asked for leftovers and found a kingdom. The story of a lonely man who chose kindness and discovered love. The story of how one moment of compassion could echo through generations. "They taught us that family isn't just blood," William said to the gathered crowd. "It's choice. It's showing up. It's seeing someone who needs help and deciding to be the answer to their prayer." That's the legacy they left us. Not land or money or property, though we're grateful for those too, but the understanding that we're all connected and that sometimes saving someone else is how we save ourselves. As the sun set over Red Mesa Ranch, now 15,000 acres and home to 5 families, all descendants of that original desperate bargain, the mourners dispersed. But the story lived on, told and retold, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. Because 40 years ago, a cowboy named Garrett Stone saw a woman named Charlotte Hayes asking for leftovers, and instead of looking away, he said 3 simple words, "They're with me." And those 3 words built a legacy that would last forever.